Welcome to the PDX files. Each week we dive into the weird and the unexplained here in the Pacific Northwest and beyond. My name is Peej.
And I'm Mac.
And Mac, what are we going to be talking about tonight?
Well, I know part of it. I mean, I kind of know the general idea, but essentially, this is kind of some crazy conspiracy theories that actually ended up being real, which is kind of the antithesis to an extent of our show. But yeah, we're going to get into some stuff that maybe you should examine.
All right. Well, I have not seen this video either, so my responses will be authentic. Here we go.
The My Lai massacre cover-up. Sadly, there is no shortage of atrocities committed during the Vietnam War, but there is one so awful and so damning to the United States that the truth about it was intentionally hidden from the public. The My Lai massacre took place in the small Vietnam hamlet of My Lai on March 16, 1968. That morning, U.S. soldiers entered the village on a search and destroy mission. While the region where My Lai was situated was controlled by Viet Cong guerrilla fighters, the American troops found no sign of enemy combatants in the area, only civilians. That didn't stop the United States' own soldiers from setting the huts on fire, murdering between 347 and 504 innocent Vietnamese people, including
I think I've heard of this before.
children under the age of 4, and committing acts of assault so deplorable against the women of My Lai that we actually can't describe them here on YouTube. Even worse, the barbaric actions of these troops were initially praised by the U.S. as fabricated reports claimed that over 120 of these needlessly murdered civilians had actually been Viet Cong. The truth about the My Lai massacre wouldn't emerge until a year later and became emblematic of the U.S.'s war efforts in Vietnam. The conflict had already been widely criticized and protested, and now it looked like America had lost any sense of morality when it came to the actions of its troops in Southeast Asia. Military secrets around the killings ultimately made it all the more shocking when the revelations were made public when former soldiers spoke about it. These weren't just crimes against humanity perpetrated against innocent women and children by American troops, but acts that the U.S. Army leadership had conspired to sweep under the rug. Among the slew of court-martials that followed, Lieutenant William Cowley was accused of directing the My Lai massacre and as a result was convicted of premeditated murder and sentenced to life behind bars. Sickeningly, he only served 3.5 years of house arrest before having his sentence commuted at the behest of then-President Richard Nixon.
It's interesting because a lot of people say, well, conspiracy theorists are crazy. At this time in the 70s, I guess, it was much easier to sort of prove or sort of disprove because there was no social media. So, it was the, the trusted media kind of coming out with some of the stuff. But it's really interesting. I know we used this before the infographics to sort of go over some of the stuff, but they're pretty accurate as far as their reporting goes. And yeah, there's a lot of disturbing stuff that the U.S. government has done beyond just massacres in Vietnam, but it's kind of messed up that some of these theories sort of come true sometimes.
Yeah, well, the Vietnam War, I think, messed up a lot of people. A lot of the U.S. soldiers. I think
Gary Busey.
To your point, I did hear about this in the past and how it was spun because again, it's like, I don't know. It's almost like, that whole Guantanamo Bay type of thing where it's just people weren't thinking, the soldiers weren't thinking, they just were like, well, I'm just gonna do it because I was told to do this, so
kind of left on their own, right? Yeah,
left on their own.
Good leadership.
Yeah, it's crazy, but it was proven to be true. So I don't know. I think, like I said, I was supposed to stop it earlier, but it looked like it was just going. So we're gonna continue with this part right here.
Let's do it.
The Senate Select Committee to study governmental operations with respect to intelligence activities. This was a 1975 Senate investigation into alleged illegal activity carried out by the US's own intelligence agencies, including the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the Central Intelligence Agency, and the National Security Agency. Church committee findings included multiple attempted assassinations of other countries' political figureheads, including President Fidel Castro of Cuba, as well as the presidents of the Dominican Republic and the Democratic Republic of the Congo. There was COINTELPRO, a covert operation conducted by the FBI to infiltrate specific domestic organizations like civil rights activists, feminists, environmentalists, people protesting the Vietnam War, and communists. It considered these groups subversive and sought to discredit them. The Church Committee also brought to light Project Mockingbird, an effort by the CIA to leverage its relationships with journalists to control the flow of information in the news. Project Minaret, wherein the NSA was working with telecommunications companies to monitor individuals on a watch list, a list that included Senator Church and other members of the Church Committee. And were it not for the work of the Church Committee, the world might never have learned about the horrendous CIA experiments that took place as part of Projects MK and MK Naomi. But these weren't even the strangest findings of the committee. Stay tuned to hear about the CIA's secret weapon.
So I'd never heard of that before.
Yeah, I kind of heard like a little bit of that before. No, I don't know what Naomi is. I know what MK Ultra is. I think we've touched on that before a little bit. Maybe we've talked about it just briefly, but yeah, I mean, it looks all kind of innocuous with the way they're doing this, but they're actually that's why I like this channel. So they kind of report on things that actually have happened and been proven to happen, and you can go look it up. And it's pretty messed up, kind of what they did. I think today people think there's like the government conspiracies and are newer and government control, but it's been going on for a long time, I think.
Yeah, it looks like both MKs are biological weapon kind of testing and whatnot.
It's not good, man.
They were
What
probably
people are
testing.
willing to go ahead.
Yeah, they were testing them on fellow Americans, the people who they deemed subversive and whatnot. So
Yeah, I think they, made a lot of mistakes that are continue to be made today, which is kind of unfortunate.
all right, well, we'll keep going here.
The findings made by the Church Committee, as horrifying as they were, led to important reforms when it came to how U.S. intelligence agencies operate. Congressional committees were to oversee the future activities of the FBI, CIA, and NSA. And famously, President Gerald Ford issued Executive Order 11905, which banned the carrying out of political assassinations. Let's head back to Europe, though, and peer into the dark plot that helped install one of history's greatest monsters. This is the Reichstag fire and the Nazi power grab. There's no denying the Nazi Party went about its power over Germany in the most brutal way possible during the early 30s. On February 27, 1933, the Reichstag, which was used as the home of Germany's parliament, was burned to the ground. The attacks were initially blamed on communists, with Dutchman Marinus van der Lubbe playing the role of patsy. Thanks to van der Lubbe being a communist, Adolf Hitler, already chancellor at this time, used the fire as justification for forcibly expelling any left-leaning or communist politicians out of parliament and had them imprisoned so they couldn't oppose the Nazi Party in the elections that took place a month later in March 1933. Hitler successfully turned Germany against communists by declaring that they were threatening to take over, thus allowing the Nazis to win more seats in the elections and helping them assume power over the country. It's hardly a stretch to conclude that the Nazis were responsible, especially given how partial they were for burning books and attacking other institutions that challenged their fascist ideology.
I mean, that's a kind of a well-known, kind of like a stepping stone for Adolf Hitler at that time. It's not so much a conspiracy. I think it's pretty well known. It's kind of scary to think about. Some of the stuff that America went through back in the 1940s, as far as like there was this anti-communist kind of like link between the two countries,
Right.
and how you can sort of look at some of the things that the Nazis were doing and like sort of equate to like, oh, this is kind of a good idea because we should do this to sort of protect ourselves, and that kind of sort of went off all the way up into McCarthy and some of those things. But this one is interesting, that the whole idea of having like a spark to something, right? So I know, like in World War One, I can't remember the name of the ship that got like sort of torpedoed or sunk. There's the Lufthansa or something like that. I can't remember the name of that, but there's always, like, there's Pearl Harbor. Vietnam
Lusitania.
is. Yeah, I was close. That was good.
Yeah.
I think Lufthansa was more of a reference to the movie Goodfellas, which I apologize for that, but it was close. But there's always some sort of a spark to some war, and I can't think. I think that's kind of why this is very familiar, to sort of get. There's a lot of stuff about 9/11. We haven't even gotten to that yet, which we will at some point in the future. But uh, there's always a theory behind some of these incidents, I guess, is what I'm
Sure.
trying to say. Yeah,
And
yeah.
it's kind of crazy how some of these ideals are playing out right now, but we shall continue here.
Operation Gladio. Would you believe us if we told you that following the end of the Second World War, armed resistance operatives were carrying out clandestine missions in European countries? No, it wasn't remnants of the Nazi Party or the USSR, it was the United States. Codenamed Operation Gladio, these covert missions were a direct collaboration between the personnel of what would become the Central Intelligence Agency, NATO, and the Western Union. Operation Gladio consisted mainly of stay-behind operations. This involved countries embedding sleeper agents in their own territories, who would lie in wait to be deployed in the event of an enemy invasion from nations like the Soviet Union, which was steadily amassing power. These stay-behind operatives would establish resistance movements within their home countries, and then, should a Soviet onslaught roll in, they'd stay put and work as spies from behind enemy lines. So what did Operation Gladio actually entail? Operatives were used to carry out political assassinations, psychological warfare, false flag operations, essentially a smorgasbord of nefarious deeds against left-wing parties in Western Europe. This often meant aligning with anti-communist militias and right-wing terrorists, as Gladio's network of secret operatives captured, tortured, and killed anyone suspected of having communist leanings. To this day, though, the U.S. Department of State denies the truth that their own operatives were backing terrorist groups, and that Gladio was only a way to aid Western European countries from resisting a potential Soviet invasion. But the CIA messing with Europe is one thing. What about the FBI killing dozens of Americans back in the good old US of A? During the Prohibition era, the FBI was involved in trying to develop ways to prevent bootleggers from brewing illegal alcohol. In order to do that, they increased the amount of methanol, a poisonous substance found in the same industrial alcohol that the bootleggers would use to make liquor. While intending to discourage people from drinking, this increase led to thousands of deaths. For over a decade, the United States banned both the sale and production of drinking alcohol, and federal law enforcement devoted significant resources to tackling the illegal attempts people made to circumvent these laws. Speakeasies and smuggling networks were primary targets for law enforcement, as was bootlegging, which had itself become a lucrative business for organized crime syndicates. But the moment one operation was busted, another quickly appeared to take its place. To limit the publicly available supply of alcohol, law enforcement and federal regulators devised a new strategy. As bootleg alcohol was typically produced by distilling industrial alcohols, U.S. officials figured that if it became legally mandated that toxic additives had to be included in these products, then they could cut off the supply before consumption. So the U.S. Treasury Department ordered companies to add quinine, methyl alcohol, and additional toxic chemicals to industrial alcohol as a deterrent that didn't work. On Christmas Eve of 1926, 60 people were admitted to Bellevue Hospital in New York as a result of poisoned alcohol, 31 of which died in the next few days. Many had inadvertently consumed methanol, industrial-strength alcohol that was illegal under federal law, but extremely poisonous. And that's just a snapshot of the staggering number of deaths that occurred as a result of alcohol poisoned by these chemicals. While it's often misinterpreted that the FBI deliberately poisoned drinking alcohol, it can't be understated the unethical lengths that the United States federal government went to in order to curb public consumption of alcohol and illegal bootlegging. They might not have been dropping mercury into bottles of whiskey, but the U.S. government did increase the level of toxic chemicals present in industrial alcohols, knowing full well that these were being distilled in order to be sold and drank.
Sheesh.
I mean, honestly, I don't remember ever hearing about that before. I remember there being a little bit of um an interruption in the just like kind of the distribution of it because of lawful activities that the government was doing. Um, but that's pretty fucked up. So you're going to kill America. It's kind of like the Tylenol thing that's going on right now. It's like
Right.
everyone's afraid of
Exactly.
Tylenol. I remember people being afraid of Tylenol back in the 80s. Like it's because people think like they were spiking it
Right.
and putting in Halloween candies. But it's a very effective psych op if you kind of look at it. It's like you create a fake crisis, um, uh, and then you start taking advantage of it, and it spreads really quickly. Even though they didn't have social media, but there was a lot of word of mouth. There was the newspapers who would really report on it, and so people was like, "Oh shit," there's all this stuff going on with it. I mean, oh man, that's messed up. That's pretty messed up one.
Right. Well, first of all, I think the
I
start of that clip.
I'm gonna take a drink to that.
Yeah, do. The start of that clip was about Operation Gladio. I've not heard of that
I hadn't either. Yeah,
either.
a lot of scary stuff that they can get away with even back in the day that probably more difficult to do now. But I mean, clearly they were determined to sort of stop that trade, and a lot of it was linked directly to organized crime. So I can sort of
Sure.
understand to an extent why they would
Right.
do that, but killing American citizens to sort of get that point across didn't seem like a very good idea to me.
And to your well, the point of this video are conspiracy theories that ended up being true. So
Exactly.
at some
Yeah.
point,
Yeah.
at some point for a while, this was kind of just a little bit of a rumor. But wow. All right, we'll
Mm.
continue here.
Following the end of the Gulf War, which took place between 1990 and 1991, a concerning number of veterans who had fought in the conflict reported developing unusual symptoms after returning home. Reports came in from the Gulf War veterans in the United States, Canada, Austria, and Denmark. But for those
You're gonna be
returning home to
fine.
the UK and suffering from this strange Gulf War syndrome, the health issues they reported would be suspiciously silenced. In every reported case, soldiers who had been previously fit and healthy seemed to suddenly develop a litany of unusual illnesses and symptoms. These ranged from experiencing chronic fatigue, hypertension, muscle pain, cognitive issues, a lack of coordination, outbreaks of rashes and other skin conditions, diarrhea, as well as symptoms related to post-traumatic stress disorder. What made this so unusual, though,
What's all that
compared to
about?
the illnesses suffered by veterans of previous wars, was that there seemed to be a much higher rate of symptoms and at a much greater intensity among those who had fought in the Gulf War. The primary cause that's been attributed to this is exposure to sublethal amounts of chemical warfare agents, particularly nerve gas, as well as the inhalation of smoke from oil well fires, and exposure to pesticides and depleted uranium. In the United Kingdom, several assessments of
Jesus.
the affected veterans were carried out to determine if there was any link between those experiencing these symptoms. But King's College London was unable to determine any common casualty among the sufferers. Meanwhile, other countries like the United States were quicker to recognize the existence of this Gulf War syndrome. The UK's Ministry of Defence vehemently denied that such a condition existed, despite the overwhelming evidence among veterans from the Gulf War. They would eventually relent in 2005, and subsequent research was conducted in 2009 that further confirmed Gulf War veterans were more likely to report symptoms compared to other veterans. They were also
wow.
twice as likely to have suffered from PTSD,
Yeah, I remember hearing
or
about
poorer
that.
quality of life following their service. However, as recently as 2010, an overwhelming majority of the UK's Gulf War veterans hadn't received any form of compensation from their government, and claims for war pensions have been denied.
Yeah, that's pretty fucked up. I mean, it seems to me like it's pretty obvious that if you're involved in um, not just the war part of it, but there's a lot of the chemicals that are going on around it, and clearly Saddam was doing a lot of bad stuff back in those days. Um, but even just imagine, like, remember, like I think Saddam like lit up all those oil refineries, and like they were just like blowing like nonstop smoke from it over the Allied forces and Allied, but and that's pretty messed up. And I know that there's a lot of things that happen to U.S. soldiers as well, as far as the Gulf War syndrome goes, and beyond just the PTSD. It's like a lot of bad health things that happen to them. It kind of makes sense. I don't, and I'm glad that this is not a conspiracy theory that wasn't acknowledged. I mean, it's good that it is actually kind of out there.
Yeah, I mean, obviously this was in the 90s when this was happening. I honestly had not. Did it go by some other name? Some name
I,
other than Gulf War syndrome? Do you know?
I remember the Gulf War syndrome being very common, even back in like the late 90s, kind of like I remember
Okay.
that being very, very, very common. Yeah.
Oh, all right. Well, again, turned out to be true.
In order to make their observations, the Public Health Service enrolled around 600 impoverished African American sharecroppers, 399 with syphilis and 201 without, many of whom had never even visited a doctor before. They were enticed by an offer of free medical care. However, the people behind the study intentionally refused to explain what exactly they were examining in the men that would unwittingly become the test subjects. Those participating in the Tuskegee experiment were falsely told that they were being treated for bad blood, a colloquial, non-specific term used in the area to describe a number of different ailments. The participants were given placebos such as aspirin and mineral supplements, and then told this would treat their condition. However, some 15 years into the study in 1947, a treatment for syphilis was discovered in the form of penicillin. The Public Health Service neglected to tell these men the truth at any point, nor did they offer the widely available antibiotic, which had since become the standard treatment for syphilis. In fact, the researchers offered no medical care to these men as their condition progressed, even as some of them started to go blind, suffered other severe health problems, or even went insane due to syphilis. Over the course of the study, 28 participants passed away due to syphilis, and a further 100 died from complications linked to the disease. 40 of the participants' spouses were also diagnosed with it, and it had been passed on to almost 20 children. A year after the story broke and sparked public outrage, Congress held multiple hearings looking at the Tuskegee experiment. In 1974, the surviving participants of the unethical study, along with the families of those who had died, received a $10 million settlement, and new guidelines were put in place in order to protect human subjects. And that was totally the last time the U.S. was ever involved in a sinister cover-up. Okay.
I like that part, but I mean that shows how far a government, and it's proven to that these things have happened, will experiment upon a population. So just to sort of blindly believe whatever the government tells you, not such a good idea. I mean, in general, you're gonna have to be in clearly certain situations. It's not like everybody is being experimented upon, but that's pretty fucked up.
It
That's
is
fucked
fucked up.
right there.
I mean, because that was, I think the Tuskegee experiment was part of like the eugenics movement back then. And obviously there was, I mean, obviously slavery was bad to begin with, but then they were just seen by these nefarious people, medical people even, that completely, disregarded the, why am I forgetting the oath that they take?
Oh yeah,
The oath, whatever.
I know what you're talking about, but yeah, I mean, essentially, and essentially, these doctors at that time they had a lot of skills, but a lot of them in the mindset weren't so much far away from like using leeches
Yeah,
in
for
their
sure.
mind. It's like they were still close enough to that time period. It's like, well, we've got some science to back some of this up, but we also have our racism to sort of back up some of the stuff that we're doing. And it's all for the benefit of the greater good. And the greater good is like a real slippery slope, right? I think a lot of folks can understand it's like, hey, you get a choice to save one person or you save the entire species.
Right.
And a lot of people are going to take the entire species factor, but even I might sort of depending on what it looks like, but this stuff is like really evil. Like it wasn't like it was also like an ultimatum given to these people. They were doing it from an experimental level to figure out what they could do to help humanity in a way. But was it racist? Yeah, I think
Oh yeah,
so.
it was super racist. I mean, they wanted to make sure I mean, like, skip the chimpanzees altogether and just go
Yeah.
to
Just go
human.
direct. Yeah, you don't have any rats, you don't have any mice. Just go
Oh,
directly to the human species, which is pretty
oh
fucked up.
gosh, that is fucked up.
Yeah.
All right, we're gonna continue here.
But that is nowhere near as freaky as what went on in Operation Midnight Climax.
Oh, god damn
MK
it.
Ultra's name lives in
It
infamy.
sounds like a lot of
The
fun.
name of Operation Midnight Climax is often forgotten about. This was a sub-project of MK Ultra, specifically its mind control research program that started in the 50s. The man in charge was one Sidney Gottlieb, a CIA chemist and spy master who was permitted to test lysergic acid diethylamide, commonly known as LSD, on civilians without their consent. Gottlieb was also that
Not good.
CIA scientist we mentioned who stole all of the shellfish poison earlier. Yep, that'll be relevant later. Anyway, back to Midnight Climax. The CIA paid
Fuck this
animals
guy.
to lure their clients to safe houses where they were then administered with a wide and dangerous array of substances without their knowledge and observed from behind one-way glass. The unwilling participants were then pressed to reveal personal secrets, fed subliminal messages to make them carry out actions involuntarily, including seeing whether under the influence of LSD they could be convinced to carry out assaults, robberies, and even assassinations.
Holy
The
shit!
goal was for the CIA to determine if brainwashing
There's real stuff
was possible
behind it.
and how to gain control over the minds of enemy spies. They also wanted to test whether LSD could be used during interrogations and combined the drug with intense isolation, dosing subjects and then keeping them confined and alone for months at a time, with hardly any food or water. Hundreds of federal agents and scientists took part in these unethical experiments on innocent people before Operation Midnight Climax and the rest of MK Ultra was shut down in the 60s. But we know what you've all been waiting for, that deranged CIA secret weapon. Arguably, one of the most infamous and unusual findings of the Church Committee was the CIA's very own heart attack gun. This secret weapon wasn't just a concept either, it was very real and used in multiple assassinations. It worked by firing a small poison dart filled with frozen shellfish toxin. I wonder where they got
for
that.
fuck's sake.
That would then trigger a heart attack in its target. The darts could easily pierce clothing and would be hardly felt by the target, leaving little more than a small red dot on the skin. The darts would completely disintegrate when entering the target's body, leaving little trace and allowing the poison to rapidly enter their bloodstream, causing a fatal heart attack. After death, the poison denatures quickly, meaning the detection in an autopsy is next to impossible, causing the death to be chalked up to completely natural causes. The existence of this almost fictitious-sounding weapon was revealed during the Church Committee's investigations and was verified by congressional testimony on the CIA's many rogue espionage activities.
So,
Fuck, man. It's like, fuck. I mean, this is what the Russians are doing today. They've killed many people in like the same way. And I'm sure that the American government is probably this program has been very effective for them, and has probably looked at ways that they can use it as well. It's just, god damn, it's like it's very depressing in a certain way, but at the same time, it kind of makes sense.
It does, and I guess my question is, how do we know this isn't happening right now, like to this day, like these things? You know what I mean? I know you made a point earlier in terms of the media being more easily coerced back then, and the absence of social media, back then prevents these kinds of things from being from being known in the moment or shortly after, versus we're just finding out, or I'm just finding out via this freaking video, which I want to also warn explain to the podcast listeners that I was laughing earlier based on what I was viewing on the video. I wasn't laughing because of the circumstances that these people were going through. So I want to be clear about that.
Well, no, I think that
crazy.
I think a lot of this stuff does continue to go on today. They just keep finding new ways to hide it. It was much easier back in like those days to sort of do things. Probably not as much today, but I mean, I guarantee you these things they're finding new ways to spy on people, new ways to assassinate people, new ways to discredit people. And maybe it's even more easy today to do it now because there's so many different options. And They just sort of make it happen. But yeah, all that kind of jives with me. I mean, sort of the 1950s. It's like a lot of people, 1950s, 1960s, like, oh, Americans were so naive and they would never do anything. Well, they were doing pretty fucking evil things to protect the country in their own way. You gotta have sort of have that mindset as well. It's like, I don't know if the people doing it were evil because they thought that they were like protecting us from
Right.
evil doers, right? But man, that's some messed up stuff. I'm glad, and well, I'm not glad at everything. I mean, I hope it's not going on today, but at the same time, I can't discount it either. If
You
that
can't
makes sense.
you can't discount it either. And and there are individuals or groups of people who unfortunately view themselves as being the ones to be making such decisions, right?
Right,
To
right,
your point from
yeah,
earlier, the what is it, the need of one versus the need of many, and those the people who are paid to be or elected to be in those kinds of spaces where those kinds of decisions are being made. I don't envy them, because
no, yeah,
yeah, there's going to be collateral damage, of course. And if the sins of the father often become sins of the son, and so yeah, I don't doubt that these things are happening right now. I think it'd be naive to think that these things are not happening right now in the background.
yeah.
And but the only thing we can hope for is that, um, as nefarious as it sounds, hopefully they're doing it for the greater good. I don't know. I don't
Yeah, I hope so too. I think the people who are doing it will probably think that, whether or not it's true, if that's
true.
what they're
Yeah.
trying to really advance humanity. But I don't think that anybody is like doing anything like the people who are actually doing the work. I doubt that they're like, leaders either on one side or the other, whether it's the left or the right,
Right. Right.
whether I think that they think that they're doing what's right for humanity. And that's kind of the danger of it, right? So you just have to sort of accept that fact. But man, this stuff is going on way back in the day. This stuff is probably going on now, but that we don't know about. I just hope I'm not part of it.
Yeah. Likewise. Well, folks, if you enjoy this content, please give it a like and share it across your socials to help get the word out about our show. If you hadn't already done so, please subscribe, and on YouTube, hit that notification bell to make sure you don't miss out on future episodes. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next time.